No one wants to encounter an emergency, but they happen sometimes. No!
And they're putting Curry in the pick and roll, trying to get him away.
No. From where? So if you're somebody that wants to be smart with your money, stick around for this video and we'll talk about what you should be doing with your emergency fund. And if you make it to the end, we'll talk about a mistake that you definitely want to avoid. Enjoy. What's going on, you guys, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Brandon. As always, we do have our Investing Academy. It's that first link in the description below if you're a beginner to the stock market. But today we're bringing it back to a very basic question when it comes to investing. This is one of the first things that an investor will commonly ask themselves, and that is the topic of the emergency fund. We actually got a couple questions recently on this, and I don't think I've done a video specifically on this, so here we have it. Today we'll cover what an emergency fund is, whether it's right for you, and then of course, how we should go about investing this money in our emergency fund. Let's start off with the very basics in what is an emergency fund. As the name kind of implies, it is a fund or it's a pool of cash that you set aside in the case of an emergency. And what's unique about an emergency fund is that it is often completely separate from your investments. So this is not part of your investment account. This is not part of your everyday checking and savings account. This is its own pile kind of stashed away that you don't want to touch, but in the rare case that something does happen, that's the pool that you want to dip into. And why would we even have an emergency fund in the first place? As you may have figured from the top of this video where we had a couple examples, things do happen. And whether that be losing your job, whether that be a medical bill that comes up, a housing repair, there's really a million things that could happen where you need quick access to capital. If your money does happen to be all tied up, if you invested all of your money in the stock market, you may come across a scenario, if the timing is just terrible, that you're forced to sell your investments at a time that you don't want to. In particular, normally where this would happen is if your investments are currently down, you may have to sell at a loss simply because you need the capital. And if you did have this emergency fund set aside, you had this pool on the side, you could give your investments time to recover. You could kind of let them do their thing, which is really how we should be treating it. And you can just dip into this pool. What the experts recommend in terms of how big this emergency fund should be, it does vary depending on who you are listening to. But by the textbook, experts will recommend that you put aside anywhere between 3 to 6 months worth of your living expenses into this emergency fund. And this would include things like mortgage payments, rent if you're a renter, your car payments, grocery bills, really just anything that you would need. If you look at your budget on a month-to-month basis, times that by anywhere between 3 to 6, and that's that baseline that you should completely sock away. Now, that baseline right there is really just that. It's a baseline, it's a recommendation, because depending on a number of variables, depending on your circumstance, that amount that you put aside can totally vary. And it's not uncommon for people to save upwards to a year's worth of expenses in their emergency fund. I also know some people who have really secure income, they have really secure jobs. They may say, I don't need an emergency fund in the first place. A couple things that I think you should ask yourself if you're deciding where you fall on the scale. If you're, for example, somebody that works in a very volatile sector, if your job security is a little bit wishy-washy, as we're seeing with COVID right now and everybody on CERB, that'd be a pretty clear example that you may want to build up this emergency fund a little bigger than usual. If you're somebody that has, let's say, a family to support, if you're the sole income earner in your household and the wife or the husband stays at home with the kids, pretty important that you have some money set aside. You don't want to leave your family hungry. So in that case, I'd actually lean to the upper side of that scale. On the contrary, if you're somebody that maybe doesn't have as many responsibilities, this may be the case for especially a younger investor, somebody who's just finishing university or maybe still in school where your expenses are low, your liabilities, everything that you need to worry about is at a much lower level. I know a lot of young people who actually don't have an emergency fund at all. And I actually think that's completely okay, assuming you're in a good position. You have income coming in, maybe you're living at home for that matter. I do think it's actually a mistake in the industry that when people say every single person has to have an emergency fund, I think that's actually a little bit misleading. It of course comes down to your specific circumstance. That's something that you have to assess for yourself. Another obvious one that pops to mind is things like health issues. If that's something that's apparent, something that's common in your life, you may want to be a little more conservative. Now, if you're somebody that is established that you do want to build up an emergency fund, which is probably why you're watching this video, and it's what I'd probably recommend for majority of people out there, let's talk about the different options you have in terms of where you can deploy this money so that you can maximize your savings, you can do what's best for it. And really the thing that we have to keep at the top of our mind, what we really need to emphasize with this money is that we want to keep it as liquid as possible. And by liquid, of course, we mean we want to be able to access this money quickly. If you think about tying your money up in real estate, if you put money into your home, that's a perfect example of a non-liquid asset, because if your car breaks down, if you got a bill at the vet and you need $10,000, you're not going to sell your house in a couple of days. That money is really tied away. And of course you could look into a home equity loan if you did want to talk about alternatives, but that's beside the point. We want to put this aside so that we can get it in the snap of a finger. And in my personal opinion, the best option, this should kind of be the default option for most people, is to look into what's called a high interest savings account. And this is different from your everyday checking and savings account that you'd have at the bank. A high interest savings account is completely separate. You can get them through the bank, but you are going to be inching out just a little bit more interest, just a little bit more return on the money that's sitting there. People may say, if I really want it to be liquid, why would I not just keep it under my mattress or keep it in my checking account for that matter? First of all, I don't think it should be mismatched in your everyday banking account because you'll probably just spend it. If you're like me, you'll find a place to spend it. And I think that goes for everybody out there. We don't want to have that in our normal account. We want to separate it. And with the high interest savings account, you're at least earning a couple percent, even though rates do tend to be pretty low today and potentially for the foreseeable future. If we can inch out 1.5%, 2%, that's absolutely worth doing. Again, we want to assume that this money is just going to be sitting there ready for quick access. In my personal opinion, if you are looking for a good suggestion, my favorite option here in Canada is what's called EQ Bank. It is a completely online savings account, high interest savings account, where you can send your money back and forth. You can park it over there. I've used it personally. It truly is my favorite account. I've actually done a video on it, explaining it, giving an overview, giving more thoughts, which I will link down below. If you do like what you see with EQ Bank and you do decide to sign up with them, I will actually include a link down below this video, which kind of tells them that I sent you there. And in return for that, they actually do give me a small little kickback. That is just a great way of supporting me and supporting this channel. If you do decide to go with them, I mean it with all honesty, that is my favorite option. I wouldn't promote them otherwise, but at the end of the day, you could go with any high interest savings account. There's really a ton of them out there. You can do it through your bank. You can find some online. Tangerine's another big one, but EQ happens to be my favorite. If you don't want to go with the high interest savings account, a second option, something else you could consider, is what's called a GIC, a guaranteed investment certificate, which is very simply a type of investment that you'd make at the bank. You could also make it on EQ, actually. They do offer GICs, but commonly at a bank, you'd purchase a GIC where essentially you lend your money to the bank and they agree to pay you a small rate, 1.2%, 1.5%, 2%, whatever the case is for borrowing your money. What I do think is very important if you do go the GIC route is you get a GIC that is cashable. You get a GIC that you're able to redeem. A lot of people, you may actually find yourself in this case that you have a GIC right now because the banks suggested you do it, your advisor told you to do it, which is probably a terrible idea for a lot of people. But point being, a lot of these GICs actually have terms. So you can't redeem your money for a year or for 3 years or for 5 years. What you'll want if you are taking the GIC route is you need to have a cashable one, so that worst case scenario you need to access this, you're able to withdraw the money early. But in the meantime, you earn some interest. The third option, which I think is a better option than the GIC, but less equal to the high interest savings account, I'd put these two on an equal level. You could invest this money in a very, very conservative fund. And by that, I'm talking about either a money market fund or a fixed income fund. I've done a bunch of videos on the channel talking about what ETFs are, exchange traded funds, and how they work. But quite simply, instead of buying an ETF or a basket of stocks, which is quite common, like the S&P 500, you can buy an ETF that invests in bonds. You can buy an ETF that invests in very short-term investments, which would be considered very, very safe. And I actually just took a quick spin around the internet on iShare, or BlackRock iShare's website. I can put a link down below if you want to check these out. You can sort all the products they have here by fixed income and take a look at which ETFs you feel may be best. Of course, again, we do want to keep in mind the safer the better. We want to err on the side of caution. It may be tempting to go for a little more of an aggressive fund, or maybe even a balanced fund or conservative. But the idea here is we want to stick to what's safe. We want to stick to a money market fund, maybe a very low conservative bond fund. And that would, of course, be actually in your investment account. You could set up a specific account within Questrade. You could set up an investment account with your personal broker, whatever the case is, and just park that money inside, buy that investment. And if you ever need to sell it to redeem the cash, you can absolutely do that. But that actually leads, guys, into the final point that if you're sticking around for this video, I think you will very much benefit from. By the way, if you are learning something new and you do if you've enjoyed the video thus far, feel free to give this a thumbs up. And thank you for watching through. Thank you for sticking around this far into the video. Let's now talk about a mistake that a lot of people make. And it's something that really, I think, nobody should be doing. And that is the common practice of using your TFSA, your tax-free savings account, as your emergency fund. This, to me, should be an absolute no-no. And I get questions all the time. Should I use my TFSA as an emergency fund? Or I do use my TFSA as an emergency fund. What should I do? The TFSA, for anybody here in Canada who has that available to them, should absolutely be used for growing our wealth. It should not be used for parking our money and letting cash sit inside. And if you understand how the TFSA works and how the Canadian government basically allows us to have a limited amount of tax sheltered account room to grow our investments, it is crazy to use that space as a savings account. It's crazy to use your TFSA as a store for cash when you can use it to go out and buy investments. You can buy stocks, you can buy ETFs that are going to grow and compound and earn you dividends. It's really, to put it simply, a waste of space if you're using it as your emergency fund. As a little analogy that I thought about before this video, whether it happens to be a good one or not, for any of our younger viewers, picture it like in Call of Duty. If you have a gun that has a bunch of slots available for attachments, but you choose to not attach anything, you don't want to put any upgrades on your gun, you just want to use it as a base model. Or another one I thought of was like if you're a sports team and you're allowed to spend X amount of money on players, if there's a salary cap of whatever amount, but you choose to just spend a little bit of money on players, you might as well maximize this little room that you have. We really, as Canadians, don't have much room. When you factor in the big picture, you got your TFSA, you got your RRSP as tax sheltered room. There are a couple other accounts, but for the most part, we want our investments to be growing in there, not for it to just be used as cash. So that is, hopefully those analogies made sense. Maybe they didn't, but that is really my overall thoughts on emergency funds, where you should put them, and just a very deadly mistake that a lot of people are making. I guarantee, I may be talking to you at home watching this video, I guarantee a lot of people are currently doing that. They're just using the TFSA as a savings account. And when you really understand the power of that tax sheltered plan, we should be investing in that account. We should be buying good investments that'll grow for us over the years. But that's my video today, guys, on emergency funds. Hopefully that answered the question from a couple of you guys and kind of gave you some direction on where to look in terms of what to do. Again, if you did want to sign up for EQ Bank, you can use the link down below because it is truly a very, very phenomenal option. You don't have to, but that does really support me. If you guys enjoyed today's video, you can feel free to give this one a thumbs up. That also really helps support the channel. You can leave a comment down below to let me know your thoughts. If you're not already subscribed, we do post videos like this every week, usually a couple videos a week. So subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you know when I upload. And then last but not least, if you are new to the stock market and you want help with setting up your accounts, getting your EQ bank account set up, all of that type of stuff, we do have our Investing Academy, which is that first link in the description below. We are basically working with hundreds of Canadians to teach them the entire process, start to finish, of investing in a very easily digestible online training form. But as always, I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.